Let's play that for you right now.
I'm Andrew Kraft, a digital journalist with News Now from Fox, and we are joined today ahead of the vice presidential debate in Salt Lake City, Utah, at the University of Utah, by KTVU Fox 2's Greg Lee, Craig Patrick out of Fox 13 in Tampa, and 5 in D.C. Some of the best political reporters around the country, and it's just a couple of hours before the first vice presidential debate between Vice President Mike Pence and Senator Kamala Harris. Tom, wanted to start with you. Obviously, the major story and the backdrop of this debate will be the president's positive COVID-19 diagnosis and his hospitalization at Walter Reed. How is this changing campaigning for each candidate? And, you know, we really didn't know if these debates were even going to be happening going forward. Tom.
Well, you're right about that, Andrew. And, you know, the first presidential debate now seems like a month ago, and it's, you know, been less, than a week. Look, this entire campaign has been turned over topsy-turvy again by this blockbuster news in the past couple of days of the president being diagnosed with COVID-19. Now, as we know, the president returned to the White House via Marine One on Monday night, but that is where he is right now. The Trump campaign train, for all intents and purposes, is parked right now until the president can make a full recovery from the coronavirus. So that really sets the stage for what's going to happen in this vice presidential debate. Not only at how high the stakes are on this, but also the very issue of the vice presidency. Andrew, we probably had more talk about the 25th Amendment this week than I can remember in my adult life, and that has to do with the fact that the President of the United States' health was in jeopardy, over the past couple of days, and people were asking real serious questions about the vice presidency, about this vice president, and also, let's not forget, on the Democratic ticket, Joe Biden's in his upper 70s. These two candidates, when they sit down against each other the other night, they both could be theoretically potential presidents at some point. So the stakes for this could not be higher.
That's right, Tom. I mean, you heard pundits all this week and over the weekend saying this is the most important vice presidential debate we have seen in modern times, just like you said, because of this, hypothetical line of succession arguments, what would happen. Both of the candidates are in their 70s. But I wanted to bring it back to the president's record, and we could probably go over to Craig or Greg, but how well is Mike Pence a steward of the president's record? We've seen him campaigning in the president's stead while he's recovering from the coronavirus, but how well can that come across at the debate stage tonight?
Well, I'll lead off. Look, it came across very well 4 years ago, didn't it? And Vice President Pence has shown time and time again he is very good at defending the president's record. And the central issue, of course, is COVID-19, particularly with the president's diagnosis. And the vice president happens to be the chair of the coronavirus task force. Right. He is very, very versed in all of this and prepared to take it on. I think looking back 4 years ago, you would give a slight victory in the vice presidential debate to the now vice president of the United States. He is very good, very on point, based on his background in radio. He knows how to communicate very well, and you will notice he speaks without pauses between his sentences, particularly in debate settings, that doesn't really give another candidate or even a moderator chance easily to jump back in and redirect or follow up with questions. All of that, I think, works in the vice president's favor, but we don't know to what extent Kamala Harris, the senator from California, now vice presidential nominee for the Democratic ticket, will go after President Trump herself. Her role traditionally as the running mate is to serve as the attack dog, but now that you have a president now recovering from a serious condition, to what extent will she tone it down? We believe she will somewhat. We also have no idea what impact this all will have on the race. That is the president's condition. It depends largely on his continual path to recovery, but this is something that on one hand could undermine the president's argument that we've turned the corner on the pandemic when he and so many in his inner circle have caught it themselves. On the other hand, it can generate sympathy for the president, bring down the temperature of the opposition to him. He may not be getting hammered as much in much of And with that, in illness, sometimes people reevaluate their thinking on things. Sometimes other people reevaluate the person who is sick. We certainly saw in 1981 when President Reagan recovered from an assassination attempt. He had a groundswell of sympathy and support, an extended honeymoon. To what extent this will either work for or against the president just remains entirely unclear, and I think both Vice President Pence and Senator Harris have that in mind when they decide to what extent to go after one another, and certainly Senator Harris and her thoughts in going after directly President Trump.
Greg, want to bring you in here,
yeah,
though.
Andrew, and I'll jump in here. You're going to see two very,
Just to go off that, you know, you're a reporter in the Bay Area. Senator Kamala Harris is from the Bay Area. She served as the, you know, San Francisco District Attorney and the Attorney General of California. In the Bay Area, you know, the campaign, the Trump campaign has just been hammering Senator Harris on her record as a prosecutor, as the Attorney General, but also saying that she isn't hard enough on these, you know, Antifa types, these radical Democrats who we've seen all summer have been, you know, causing violence in cities across the country. But how will her record stand today?
Well, and I think the Trump and Pence campaign have been sort of trying to figure out what sticks, right, in terms of attacks against Senator Kamala Harris. She called herself the top cop when she was the Attorney General. And progressives, for the most part, were very unhappy with her during that time for not stepping in to investigate fatal police shootings. But they've also compared her to a Trojan horse for the left. And that's been an argument that we've heard a lot from the Trump campaign about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that their progressive values are steeped in this liberal bastion that many believe California and the Bay Area to be. So I certainly think we'll see some of those arguments and some of those attacks. And to just build off of what Craig said, I think you're going to see two very different styles in Mike Pence, a very calm delivery, and for Senator Kamala Harris, she's a former prosecutor. We've seen her during the judiciary hearings. We've seen her as a prosecutor. We've seen her during the primary debates. She is going to come out, and I think she has to find a balance, again, to Craig's point, in terms of how do we hit the Trump administration for their handling of the coronavirus, but also being sensitive to the fact that the president continues to recover and the American people are waiting to see him recover in full.
Tom, I want to go back to you, though, just about the issues and the records at hand. You know, that we've seen the Trump campaign go after Senator Kamala Harris, that, you know, she will be the one leading the ticket, not Joe Biden. Just to repeat some of these campaign talking points, we've seen, especially with this big Supreme Court fight. I mean, remember, this was when Senator Kamala Harris really broke out into the mainstream and got her name recognition up there during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. And I'm sure they'll go after Senator Harris also because, remember, she was competing against Joe Biden as a primary candidate and went after his record, too. So what are you looking for there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, any time you have two candidates that competed against each other in the primaries, and then one of those candidates goes on to be the party nominee, you know, look at Joe Biden and Barack Obama back in 2008. You know, look at Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. You know, they have these primaries so the candidates can go after each other. Now, Mike Pence never ran against Donald Trump. Who knows what Donald Trump may have said about Mike Pence had Pence gotten into that race back in 2016. But, you know, heading into this, Kamala Harris has something at her disposal which, if she sits down and watches it, will be an amazing piece of preparation for this vice presidential debate. And that is simply the videotape of the 2016 debate between Mike Pence and Virginia Senator Tim Kaine. Tim Kaine put on a performance that night which people are still talking about in this city. He interrupted, he complained, he just generally came off as not very likable to a large segment of the American people. And that didn't help when you had a party candidate like Hillary Clinton already struggling with image issues, you know, with the general public. If Harris can watch that tape of Kaine in 2016 and in large part just do everything that was not. That's going to be a major step forward into her own introduction to this national television audience. Yes, a lot of people were watching the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. Yes, a lot of people watched those primary debates. But this is different. This is a stage that Kamala Harris has never stood on before quite like this. So in large measure, it's going to be a way for her to introduce herself to the American people. And if she doesn't introduce herself to the American people, you can bet Mike Pence is going to be very ready to do that for her. So it's going to be interesting to see, how hard does Pence go in on this? Look, we talked about it. He's a former radio host before Mike Pence ever became Indiana governor, before he ever became a congressman, before he ever became vice president. He was a broadcaster. And when you were a broadcaster, you have certain tools at your disposal that maybe somebody who, even though she spent a lot of time in courtrooms as a prosecutor through the legal system, Kamala Harris is no stranger to talking in front of people. But however, she's never commanded an audience the way Mike Pence has. So we're going to see two different skill sets on display here, and we'll be able to see, which one gets the upper hand, Mike Pence or Kamala Harris. This is going to be fascinating to watch.
And Craig, just feel free to jump in here. Obviously there are some precautions because of the coronavirus. They've agreed to do plexiglass at the podiums at the debate, a little further away on that stage as well. We'll see if Susan Page, the moderator, she's a USA Today columnist and reporter, will have as hard a time as Chris Wallace in actually moderating. But feel free to jump in on what Tom was saying, Craig.
You're going to have a very different kind of debate. You're not going to get the contentious back and forth that you had both weeks because the reviews were so horrible, and both sides know that. This will be more cordial. That much we can guarantee. In terms of plexiglass, yes, that's a barrier, but they're not going to be in hermetically sealed plexiglass boxes. Air can and will circulate, therefore, around walls. And so it does raise a question that both candidates may have to answer, particularly if it is asked during the debate. I go back to 1992's vice presidential debate when Admiral Stockdale comically asked, "Why am I here?" Well, they do have to maybe answer a question. Why are they even there? When Vice President Pence himself did interact with President Trump, and we're still in a 14-day window. If you look at CDC guidelines, when you were closely next to interacting with someone, then you quarantine for 14 days. Why is this not a case of do as I do, not as I say? That has to be raised, and the same goes for Senator Harris. Why is she even there in an age in which all of us are in different rooms all across the country? Why, given the situation we have, do they feel the need at this point to come together and proceed? That's part of it. Bouncing off of what Tom noted about Senator Harris, too, and the contrasting styles between them, there's a big wild card in terms of how well Senator Harris can perform. She has a very high upside and has vulnerabilities as well. We saw that in the national debates during the primaries. The first one in South Florida, for example, we saw Senator Harris take on former Vice President Biden, challenge his record on civil rights, his prior dealings years ago with segregationist senators and busing. It put Biden clearly on his heels and gave her a significant boost after that first debate. It shows she can score points off of then opponents. And then in a follow-up debate, Tulsi Gabbard, of all candidates, came after Senator Harris, challenging her on her record as a prosecutor, asserting that an innocent person remained in jail because perhaps she blocked evidence or that she put all these people away from minor marijuana convictions, while she smirked at the question of whether she had ever smoked marijuana herself. And in that moment, we saw that Senator Harris was flat-footed and was not well prepared when being attacked. So I'd like to hear more from Greg, because Greg has probably seen much more in her dealings and debates in California. But what we've seen on a national stage is that she can score points off an opponent, and an opponent can score points on her, maybe the equivalent of Arena League football, where you could have a high-scoring affair, particularly if it does get contentious.
And Greg, that's right. I mean, we don't know the list of issues or topics. It hasn't been released like it was in the first presidential debate. What comes to mind for me is we haven't heard anything yet on foreign policy, but as far as the issues are concerned, do you think it'll mostly be surrounded the coronavirus?
Yeah, Andrew, and I think to Craig's point, we know Kamala Harris is she's very good at taking notes, and she's very good at turning those notes into attacks or turnarounds. She's clearly been doing her prep. She will have a lot of one-liners ready to go in response to Vice President Pence and his calm demeanor. But to go back to your question, Andrew, I think what we're going to see is what we saw Joe Biden do in that first debate, albeit in between attacks, which is pivoting often. We're talking about the economy. We're talking about the Supreme Court, finding ways to pivot back to the coronavirus and finding ways to talk about the administration's response to the coronavirus, heightened by the fact that the president is now battling the disease. And beyond that, I think for Mike Pence, being part of that task force and leading that task force, he will laud the administration's performance related to the coronavirus, trying to change the narrative a bit, and then turning it to other conservative issues, speaking more to those conservative voters and maybe those undecided voters that they are trying to attract. Issues like the Supreme Court nomination of Amy Coney Barrett and what that means for conservative Christians and evangelicals, as well as shifting it to the economy and why they believe the Trump-Pence administration is most poised to build the country back from the economic downturn caused by the coronavirus. So I think, again, you're going to see two very contrasting styles, and it is going to be interesting to see who can get the other person back on their heels with an attack and perhaps create one of those moments where, in Joe Biden's case, he just turned to the president and said, "Will you shut up, man?" So I think we're going to see some of that, and it'll be interesting to see those dynamics play out, specifically in the fact that they're going to be inside kind of these plexiglass barriers.
And Greg, just to stick with you for final thoughts, you know, like we've been saying and we've been hearing, do you think this is the most important vice presidential debate that we'll see in modern times?
Oh, I absolutely do, because oftentimes by the time we get to the VP debate, it's kind of an afterthought. But the reality is, as we consider what will happen in the next couple of weeks, we are slated for another presidential debate on October 15th, October 22nd. We still don't know the status of those because we're waiting to see how President Trump proceeds in his recovery. So, worst case scenario, this could very much be the last debate that the American people see. In addition to the fact, people are already voting in many places throughout the country. I received my ballot this week. Californians are starting to vote early. So people are making their decisions, and for that small portion of American voters that are still undecided, they need to hear about the issues that are important to them, and this may be their best opportunity to do so.
And Craig, same question for you. Do you think this is the most important vice presidential debate we'll see?
Well, it's the most significant debate in my lifetime. Whether it moves the needle, that remains to be seen. There's the potential that there could be so many other turns of events between now and then that it may not have an impact. They seldom do. Looking back, none really have, except maybe '76 when Dole did Ford no favors. But there is significance in this debate, and in particular in reaching out to the few remaining persuadable and late deciding voters out there. There aren't many. Maybe it's effectively 3% or less, but Florida was decided by 1.2%. The key states in the upper Midwest, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, decided by less than 1%. So this is an opportunity for both the Vice President and Senator Harris to reach out to those few voters who have not yet made up their mind, as few as there may be, who could play a significant role in the election. So it may not move the needle much, but just enough to swing the race.
And thank you, Craig, for that. And, you know, Tom, same question for you. Lastly, your thoughts, and is this the most important debate we'll see between two vice president running mates?
Well, you know, look, on that question, I've kind of had a change of mind this year. I have long believed and long said that people don't vote for vice presidents. They just don't. You might not be crazy about a vice president. Maybe it wasn't your first choice, but at the end of the day, every 4 years, when people go into that booth or, you know, pick up that ballot now or mail it or whatever they're going to do this year, they're voting for the president. With everything that's gone on just in the last 24 hours, I think this does significantly raise the stakes here. And, you know, that's not hyperbole, as we said at the start of this. You know, Mike Pence was being talked about in this city as maybe having to step in at one point and exercise the powers under the Constitution if he had to take the reins of the powers of the presidency as an acting president. So those stakes don't get any higher than this. But a couple of things to remember about each of these candidates. Through everything in the last 4 years, through all of the controversies, through all of the conflict, from all of the daily hubbub that makes this city spin around the politics that comes out of the White House, Mike Pence, in large part, has been a rock through all of this. He very rarely goes off course. He very rarely ever says anything that is off message. He might be one of the most disciplined politicians we have ever seen in this city, and that's saying a lot, and that's a big advantage to him going in. The problem for him is to not look robotic, to talk to the American people in the way that they're thinking right now, to not just spew the message points from the campaign, but to try to maybe show them another side of Mike Pence that they maybe haven't seen up until this point, because there are some people that look out at him and see a yes man. So Mike Pence in 2024 is probably going to be looking at this White House again with thoughts of his own political future. And that work starts in this next vice presidential debate. Because if Mike Pence has an intention of taking that Oval Office himself someday, he's going to have to start to make that connection when people see him as more than just a vice president, more than just a subordinate to Donald Trump. Now, on Kamala Harris's side, look, she's an unknown to a lot of people, even though us in the media talk about her all the time. The vice president is going to try to couch her as a liberal. He's going to try to couch her on crime. He's going to try to couch her as somebody who's been soft on some of the violence and the rioting that we've seen in these protests over the past couple of months. Harris probably needs to lean in on something that she hasn't wanted to talk about too much in this Democratic primary process and now this campaign, and that's her background as an attorney general and as a prosecutor. It's something she's really stepped back from because, the left-wing liberal wing of that party, that's not really where a lot of their hearts and minds are, on the left wing of the party right now. Kamala Harris might want to pick that up, dust that off, remind people that the felony rate in San Francisco was at 50% when she took office, and 75%, under her 75%, under her administration there. This is going to be, and this is not to sound like the old sports analogy we talk about, but you put these two fighters in the ring, the Trump campaign is on the ropes right now. They've had a horrible couple of days. The president diagnosed with COVID in Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda. He flies back here to the White House. He's already getting more criticism over this video that he made, telling people not to be scared of the coronavirus, not to let it dominate them. The Biden campaign had been trying for weeks to get the messaging back on coronavirus, and that's exactly what they have right now. The Democrats could set up possibly a knockout blow here if Harris has a big night on Wednesday.
All right, interesting final thoughts from Fox 5's Tom Fitzgerald out of Washington, D.C., Fox 13 Tampa's Craig Patrick, and from Fox KTVU in San Francisco, Greg Lee. Thank you all so much, and keep it here on News.